Hey there, spirits, and welcome to the graveyard. My name's Soul, and this is my ghost friend, Art.
Hello.
In this video, I'll show you how I made these custom Squishmallows. Let's get to it. So the whole setup for this video is that my sister and her boyfriend love these plushies called Squishmallows. So if you don't know what Squishmallows are, they're like the Beanie Babies of the modern world, except they sell out instantly and they drop limited and special edition designs every month. Me and my girlfriend decided we were going to make them custom ones that fit each of their personalities. So to avoid copyright issues, we decided to coin them as Squishmallows.
That's the name for the marca, Patito.
Now, I could only work on these when they are away from the house, so it took me over a month for me to make them. Every time they would come home, I would just scramble to clean everything up and pretend I wasn't doing anything. Haley even worked virtual the last week before Christmas, and I had to lock her out of our room. Now, they knew we were making them their gifts this year, but they had no idea what it was going to be. We wanted to make these as authentic as possible so they would think these were store-bought. So we came up with a little scheme of giving them another handmade gift first, which was the felt keychains, and then pretending like we bought the Squishmallows. And you can see how we made those and how they reacted to those in my previous video. Link in the top right. Now, I apologize in advance that this video is so long, but I wanted to make a kind of comprehensive video, so if someone wanted to actually follow the steps, they could. Well, that, and it took me over a month to make these, so there was a lot of footage. So please hit that like button and subscribe, it would really help me out. And the animated GIF reaction is at the end of the video, so stick around for that. But enough with the talk, let's jump into it. All the things you will need are fabric, we mostly use no-pill fleece, polyfill or stuffing, a sewing machine and pins, an embroidery hoop and embroidery stabilizer, ribbon, and some kind of printable transfer sheet, plastic tag holders, a printer and scanner, scissors, and the rotary cutter is optional, a hole puncher, something to design and make the illustrations on. I used my iPad. All of these products will be linked down in the description. Here's some advice going into this project. Make sure you take your time and give yourself enough time to make them. Don't be afraid to resize and recut pieces. Buy more fabric than you think you need. Make a checklist in the order that you need to sew things in and break down each step. Label everything so you don't cut things wrong and you can stay organized. And lastly, have fun with it. All your hard work will pay off when you have the finished project. So first things first, let's make the concept for these plushies. We made lists and personality traits for each person and designed the plushies around those. Each Squishmallow also has funny first lines and a summary about them, so this is when we wrote those down too. Haley is a huge foodie and loves going out to eat. She has a mission to find the best spicy chicken sandwich and even has a ranking board. Her favorite color is pink and she has the nickname Chicken. She loves crafting things and sending those gifts to her friends. So it was very obvious that we are going to make her into a pink, artsy, spicy chicken sandwich. Jordan loves playing video games and plays D&D every Sunday. He loves trying new alcoholic drinks from his many nerdy themed cookbooks, and his favorite color is purple. So we made him into a D&D themed purple dragon. And because they were a special set, we wanted both designs to have matching fabric, so we had them both use the sparkly foil. Now, I couldn't find a blank Squishmallow sewing pattern online, so we're just going to have to deconstruct one. We didn't want to cut open any of ours, so we bought the most plain looking one we could find off of someone online. And then, like an illegal deal, we met up and he sold it to me. Now, if you're squeamish to Squishmallow carnage, I would look away now, because I'm about to rip this boy apart. So the first thing I did was compare Squishmallows and seeing the most common line patterns on both of them. The orange Squishmallow is a special variant shape, so the seams aren't going to work perfectly for the pattern I'm trying to make. Next, I'm going to use the Sharpie on the orange to draw those common lines. And then I cut along those lines and seam rip the seams. Unfortunately, we had to sacrifice the orange for making the pattern, but don't worry, he'll be back later. Here you can see all the pieces that make up the base of a regular Squishmallow, including the tag. I'm going to hand trace around each piece to make a pattern, and then I can scan that into the computer to get the proportions right. And when I was doing that, Felix decided to visit his Juliet, and I was able to experience a very romantic encounter. But I felt like I was intruding, so I left. Sam then went into Illustrator and cleaned up the pattern and mirrored it so it was even on both sides. She made sure to add a 1/4 seam allowance to everything. The file will be linked in the description. I then upscaled the pattern to be the same size as an 8-inch Squishmallow, since the orange was only a 5-inch one. And in your software, you want to make sure under print handling, since our page is bigger than a normal sheet of printing paper, what we're going to be doing is using the tile large pages. And what this will do is print over multiple pages to make sure the sizing you have in the software is the same as when it prints out in real life. So here we can see it's going to take 6 pieces of paper to print on. And what we're going to do is we're going to have an overlap of 0.25. What this overlap will do is make it easier to tape up the pieces of paper because they'll have little edges on each side that you can overlap onto each other. And then that way we can get the actual size pattern that we're going to be working with. And all you have to do is press print. I'm then going to tape the tile printed paper together to get the perfect patterns without having a huge printer. I'm putting the tape in areas that I'm going to be cutting at so the tiles don't fall apart when I'm cutting them. Here I'm comparing it to a real size 8-inch Squishmallow to make sure that my math and printing was correct. And then I'm going to cut out each piece. Here's all the fabric we're going to be using. We bought it during the week of Black Friday and it ended up costing us around $9 for all the fabric, which was such a steal. Now we couldn't find the exact fabric that the company uses, so we had to go with one that was closest in fuzziness and stretch and had the most color choices to work with. So we ended up going with no pill fleece. One important thing to note is that it was stretchier in one direction, so we needed to have the stretch facing horizontally when cutting out the fabric. Now I'm just going to lay out the pattern onto the fabric and trace around it. It's easier to lay something heavy on top of the pattern so it doesn't move. We need to make sure we mark where the darts go, but we're not going to cut them out. You can use scissors to cut them all out, but using a rotary tool like this really makes it fast and easy to go around curves. We got this one from the Dollar Tree actually. Now that we have all the patterns for the base traced, I can cut them out. Now we have all the pieces cut out. Now to make the detailed patterns. I'm drawing using the guide to help size the details to the size of the base. I'm constantly checking to see how the sizes compare to the finished plushie. You can measure to see how big actual plushie's details are and adjust your pattern as you go. I actually sized up my drawings when I printed them out because they were too small when I drew them. And make sure you use all the references you have to make the most accurate plushie. Once I had all the patterns down, I took them into Procreate to make the drawings cleaner and symmetrical. Once I was happy with the size, I printed them out and then labeled each of the pieces to either add seam allowance for when I cut them or cut a bigger piece of fabric so it will fit in the embroidery hoop when I free embroider on my sewing machine. And then you cut out all your patterns. See, I told you the orange would be back. I'm using some of the colors on him on the chicken plushie. I only needed an orange piece as small as the beak, so there was no reason to buy orange fabric at the fabric store. And I was going to use the yellow parts for the seeds, but they were too small and didn't turn out very good, so I scrapped that idea and decided to embroider the whole seed into the beret. Thank you, Mr. Orange, for your sacrifice. You shall now be buried gracefully. Rest in peace, little friend. Now I'm taking all my detailed patterns and adding them to my respective fabrics. Now, most of the time when you mark your fabrics, you do it on the wrong side so the marks don't show up on the plushie. But for the embroidery pieces, I needed to mark on the right side so I could see where to embroider in relativity to the cut. Don't worry about the marks because I'm going to sew on the inside of them so they don't show up on the outside of the plushie. Now that all my pieces are cut, it's time to sew the pieces together. Time to set up the sewing machine. Always sew fabric together with the right sides facing each other. The wrong side should be facing outwards. Then you flip the piece inside out, and this way there's no raw edges exposed and your seams are clean. So after sewing and cutting all the fabric, I would say that it's easier to cut the pieces bigger or into squares around the pattern. It's easier to hold onto while sewing and you don't have to worry about not sewing one side because the piece is just a little shorter than on the other or not aligned correctly. You only really have to draw the pattern on one side of a mirrored piece too, so you can see what line to sew on. Now I'm just going to go along on my detail pieces and sew the ones that need to be sewn together. So I sewed the horns, the spike on the head, the tail, and the ears. And now it's time for embroidery. I switched to the free sew foot, and my machine didn't come with the feet dog guard, so I had to make one out of a piece of cardboard. You gotta be resourceful when you're dealing with crafting sometimes. This machine was so old and we bought it secondhand that they don't even sell the guards anymore. Now make sure you practice a lot on the fabric you're going to be working with, and to get the hang of embroidering before you do it on the final piece. I'll link the video up in the corner of how I learned to free embroider on my sewing machine. She does a much better job at explaining how it works. And you can see my experimenting with different widths of the needle and practicing curves. You can see my first attempts are absolutely horrible and they slowly get better. And it actually is pretty good by the time I do the final piece. I was also testing fill techniques, and that first seed is really bad texture, and the circle is way better. I also wanted to test to see if I can embroider over a raw edge of another piece of fabric and hide that seam under the embroidery. It actually worked really well and saved me basically from making a patch, cutting it as close to the edge of that patch as possible, and then gluing and sewing it to the main plushie. This way I could just cut out the shape of the piece and embroider it directly onto the body of the plush. So you can use any sized embroidery hoop that you want. You just have to make sure that you have enough room to move the foot around without hitting the edges of the hoop. I'm using a 7-inch hoop and an 8-inch tearaway embroidery stabilizer. I would say the stabilizer is not optional, and that's just because the fabric is so stretchy, it would be pulled and stretched when you're embroidering on it. The stabilizer, well, does exactly that. It stabilizes it and helps it stay flat when you embroider on it. And make sure you embroider on the right side of the fabric and not the wrong side. This is the side that's going to be showing on top of the plushie. You add the stabilizer on the back of the fabric and pull the fabric taut without stretching the design out of proportion. The fabric should sound like a drum when it's done correctly. The first piece I'm embroidering is the wings because they just have straight lines. I'm leaving the more complicated embroidery until the end. I'm just going to mark where I want to embroider, and I'm just going to use my practice sheet to see what thickness of lines that I want. And I'm just going to take it really slow. The saying is slow hands, fast feet. So basically, you want to move the hoop in an even, slow manner with your hands and have the needle going really fast. I found that my cleanest lines came from embroidering over the line twice, and don't be afraid to go back and cover any gaps in your embroidery. And as you can see here, you need to make sure your embroidery lines go outside of your pattern. This way, you don't have any gaps if you accidentally sew outside the lines. Next, I'm going to be doing the D20 dice, and because I don't want to do the math, I'm just going to cut out the triangles and trace those lines onto the piece. And I'm just going to embroider the lines the same way I did the wings. Next, I'm going to be sewing the wings together. I'm going to cut around the embroidered piece with seam allowance, and I'm going to be putting the right sides together to sew. I'm going to be sewing the insides to the front of the wing first, and off to the sewing machine we go. Here I'm struggling to cut off the purple piece at the right angle and size to leave that purple piece on top of the front of the wing. But I finally get it. I'm taking the pattern for the wing again and tracing it on the wrong side of the Frankenstein wing because the lines got rubbed off and are misaligned when I sewed them together. And once I have a nice coating of Sharpie on my hands, I'm ready to sew the front and the back of the wings together. And after that, I just flip it inside out and I have a fully functional wing. Now I'm going to be sewing the D20 dice to the body of the dragon. I'm going to be using that trick that I learned earlier, and I'm going to be cutting right next to the line of the pattern and then embroidering that raw edge down. I'm going to be leaving seam allowance at the bottom of the dice so I can add it to the body's seam allowance when I sew the whole body together, but also it helps me align the dice onto the body. I'm going to pin the dice down and sew along the edges so it doesn't move when I embroider it. And one trick I learned is if the embroidery hoop is too small to cover the whole design, you can offset it to one side, embroider it there, move the hoop to another section of the design, and then embroider it on that side. And that's what I had to do with this big old dice design. The trick is to keep the middle of the embroidery line on the edge of the cutout piece. This way it embroiders on the piece and the main body and covers up the raw edge. The next thing that I needed to embroider was the nose holes on the dragon's snout. I just decided to embroider these by hand because the holes were so small and the fabric was super stretchy. After that, I needed to mark where the face would be. I traced a real Squishmallow's face and cut out the eye holes to trace onto the body of the dragon. All the Squishmallows had the same eye placement and face shape, so I just measured and traced where those would go on the dragon. So here's where I ran into problems. As I said before, this fabric was really stretchy, and when I tried to sew the edges down like the dice, it ended up folding and bunching and misaligning so much. I actually had to seam rip the snout off of the face, and it left a little scar, which kind of ended up looking like a battle wound, so it worked out in my favor, but man, was I stressed. I was so nervous to seam rip it because if I ripped the fabric, I would have to redo the dice all over again because the dice is sewn to the body at this point. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to embroider the eyes first and then use this fabric fusion glue to glue the snout onto it and hope that it stabilizes it enough to sew and embroider it. For the eye embroidery, you just have to make straight lines back and forth to fill up the circle. It looks the cleanest when you have the threads going in the same direction than filling it in at random. I mean, come on, look at that fill. It's just chef's kiss. I mean, like, look, it looks like a store-bought one. Ah, And then I glued the snout on. I had to wait a couple hours for the glue to dry before I even knew this would work. And if it didn't, I don't know what I would have done, to be honest. And I couldn't work on it for another 24 hours. So let's just say I had a really stressful night and a hard time sleeping. Luckily, it worked, and it worked really well actually. And I ended up using this technique on all the other small pieces later on. The glue worked so well, in fact, that I didn't even have to sew the snout down. I just embroidered it straight away. And here's the snout embroidered on. And as you can see, my freehand embroidering started getting really good and clean. And now that I have all the pieces ready for the dragon, I was on to doing the details for the chicken. Learning from my past mistakes, I decided to do the eye embroidery first. So if I messed up, I would just have to recut the front base again. I'm just using the same technique of tracing the eyes and filling it with the embroidery that I did with the dragon. Next, I'm going to glue the beak and the waddles? Waddles? Really? That's what they're called? Okay. To the face, and I'm going to set that aside to dry. While that was drying, I embroidered the yellow of the fire onto the red fabric. I even added an outline to the yellow part. Then I cut it out and glued it onto the foil piece and set it aside to dry. Now it's on to embroidering the seeds onto the beret. As you can see here, I was getting really confident with the free embroidery, and I was able to make very clean seeds. The first thing I did was make a straight line down the middle of the seed and just move over slightly while overlapping to make it wider at the base. I even got the courage here to make the decision to outline the eyes instead of just leaving them filled in. I'm really glad I ended up making that decision because it ended up making the pieces look really real. The next step was to add the little pip at the top of the beret, and that was just cutting a little rectangle out, cutting a slit in the beret, and then sewing that slit closed with a pip in it. I then cut the top of the beret out, leaving seam allowance, and sewed the bottom onto it, making sure the right sides are together. And then I flipped that bad boy right side out, and the beret is done. Next was doing the bottom part of the chicken. I was using this hamburger for reference and measurements. I had it sewn in a way that the seams were clean and still had the lettuce sticking out just like this. So let's start with the lettuce and the bun. Because I want the lettuce to sit on top of the bun, I'm going to lay the right side of the bun up and then lay the right side of the lettuce right on top of that. Then I'm going to sew along the top edge. Now that I have that sewn, and you see how the lettuce sits on top of that, I'm now going to add it to the foil. And because I want this to be a clean edge, I'm going to put the pieces right side together, just like all the other times I've sewn, and sew it along the top edge. And once I unfold it, it will be a clean edge just like this. Now I'm just going to repeat that on the back side of the chicken. But wait, there's a twist to the bottom foil. Since I'm making it look like the foil is folded over in the back, I have to fold over the edge to get a clean edge and then sew the two pieces together to make it seem like there's a fold in the foil. And now that the foil is ready, I repeat the steps I did on the front side. And boom, now you have the bottom ready for the base. Now that the glue is dried, I'm going to embroider around the beak and then switch thread colors and embroider onto the wattle. While I was doing the beak, I ran out of my bobbin thread and had to hand embroider the tiny gap instead of setting up the machine again for a tiny section. Now those are attached to the face. Now that the glue was dry, it was onto the fire. I used the same technique as the beak and just embroidered around the raw edge. And while I was in the middle of embroidering, a screw randomly fell out of the machine and I had no idea where it went. Luckily, we opened up the machine later and found the spot where it went and screwed it back in. Here's where I finally embroidered that line around the eyes. After doing those curves around the beak and the wattle, I knew I could do it on the eyes. And this way I can fix the oval shape of the chicken's eyes with an outline. And then I did it on the dragon too. And I mean, they just look so good. I mean, look, freaking good soup. Then I sewed the bottom section onto the body of the chicken. It was just a matter of lining up the bottom of the foil with the bottom of the pink base, and then cutting the pink off with seam allowance to the height of the bun, and then you just sew them right sides together. This way the lettuce stays on the outside of the body, and then I just repeated it on the back. Now that I have all the details sewn, it was on to tackling how to make the tags. Sam designed them based off of the real tags and just changed the words and name. I had the brilliant idea to take temporary tattoo paper, print out the design, and add them to a piece of white ribbon. You just have to make sure that it's the right size and that it's mirrored so the words go on the right way when you transfer it. I then cut out the tattoo paper and double checked the real tag for the orientation and position of the design. I then cut the ribbon, burned the edges with a lighter, and transferred the tattoo over, just like when you were a kid. And this is when I realized it was on the wrong side of the ribbon, so I had to print it again. And then that print had a smudge over it, so I printed it again. Then it's just a matter of adding all the tattoos to the ribbons. I made a QR code to replace the barcode on the tag, and that takes you to my YouTube channel. Neat. So the tattoos were actually very sturdy and scratch resistant, so I ended up not needing to Mod Podge over the ribbon like I thought I would. Yeet! I will say that the tattoo was a little tacky, so I went and took powder from this knockoff brand of Tums and rubbed it onto the tattoo. Look, we didn't have any baby powder at the house. On the bright side, it worked, and it ended up making the tag smell fruity. And with all of that done, it was time to connect and fill the plushie. We bought this polyfill from Walmart and it was around $4. We got a big 20-ounce bag and only used about an eighth of it, so I would go with a smaller bag. So what I did was sew all of the pieces to the body first, so I didn't have to worry about them moving when I was sewing the front and back together. So I stuffed the wings a little bit to give them some bulk and sewed them onto the body. Make sure when you sew them facing inwards so the seam is hidden within the body. Basically, everything facing into the middle of the body will be on the outside. The reason I'm sewing them directly onto the sides is because on an original Squishmallow, the details are sewn directly into the seams. This will ensure that I'll have a clean edge around each of the detailed pieces. Now, pre-sewing the pieces isn't really necessary. I'm just an amateur seamstress and this makes it easy for me to manage the pieces and not get overwhelmed when I sew the back and front together. Next, I added the tag to the main body and it's on the back left side of an original Squishmallow. So I just found the same spot on my plushie, stacked them in the same order, and sewed them so the tag will be on the outside and the excess would be on the inside. All Squishmallows have this really thin ribbon that the name tag can loop into, so I just used the same thick ribbon for the tag and cut it thinner and melted the edges into the width that I needed. I then found the same spot on my plushie, which is in the upper right side of the Squishmallow, and added the ribbon facing towards the middle. Because the ribbon is too small to be pinned down, I just taped it down with some basic office tape and then just sewed right over it. You can just rip the tape off afterwards. Next was sewing the darts. These help shape the Squishmallow pieces from being flat to having a curve. There's 2 on the front bottom and 2 on the back bottom. What I did was just fold the dart in half with the right sides facing each other and then just sew straight down the line. And as you can see from the real one, this is what it looks like when it's sewn. And we're just basically copying that. I found that it was easiest to sew from the edge to the top of the triangle of the dart. And you just repeat it on all the darts. Now with the darts sewn, it's time to sew the slits together. You can already see the curve coming together and these slits will just solidify that shape. I'm just going to fold the right sides together and sew the slit closed. It's basically the same way I did the darts. There's 1 slit at the top of the front and 1 on the back top and 1 on the back bottom. And as you can see with the slits closed, when I hold up the piece, it already has that egg shape to it. And now it's onto the scariest part for me, sewing the front and back together. This is where all my theories and planning are proved to be correct or wrong. I'm just making sure that I push all of those details like the wings and ribbon loop towards the middle. Then I'm going to align and pin the front and back together. You don't have to worry about the bottom tag until we sew the bottom on. And after sewing, it's the moment of truth. Did I do everything right? And bam! Everything turned out the way I planned. The loop is on the outside, the wings are on the outside. The top slit did get a little misaligned when I was sewing, but that's okay because it will be covered by the beret. And I kind of forgot about the lettuce, but it's all good. I'll just cut those loose pieces off and sew the lettuce edges together later. Now it's time to add the bottom. We need to flip the body inside out again and then open it up to see the oval of the bottom. I'm then going to have the bottom face with the right side facing inward, and I'm just making sure that the tag is also on the inside. I'm then going to pin the oval on all 4 corners of the bottom of the body to help the oval not move when I'm sewing it. And by 4 corners, I mean the parts where the front and back are sewn together, the back slit, and approximately in the middle front. I'm just going to sew around the edge, and I'm going to leave about a 2-inch opening on the back side on the other side of the tag so we can flip the piece right side out and have room to stuff it. Sewing it was a little awkward because it is a circle. Just make sure you're sewing 2 pieces of the fabric only and that the other side doesn't sneak under the part you're sewing. You just want to take this part slow and rotate the plushie as you go. And now it's time to flip. The bottom looks really good and the tag is out. Success! Good. Now it's time to stuff it. Here I'm grabbing clumps of the polyfill and pushing it into the plushie. You can see me comparing the density to a real Squishmallow, and I'm just going to keep massaging and filling it until I think it squishes and looks like the real one. Now that I'm happy with the filling, it's time to close the gap. I'm going to be hand sewing it closed with a ladder stitch, and I'll put a link to a video that explains how to do a ladder stitch in more detail up in the right corner. I'm then going to end the stitch by tying a knot and then pushing the thread into the plushie and pulling it really tight and cutting off the thread so it's lost in the plushie. Then I sewed the lettuce pieces together by hand with the same ladder stitch. Now it's time to add the beret. I stuffed it a little bit and then using the ladder stitch, I just attached it directly to the body. With the chicken done, now it's time to do the dragon. I'm just going to be doing the same thing I did to the chicken. Just stuff the parts that need stuffing and sew the pieces as close to the edge as possible. Then it was just rinse and repeat. The dragon just had more details sticking out of it, so it was more pieces to attach to the body.
Boom, bam, bop, bada bop, boom, pow.
With the body done, I then stuffed and added the spike and the tail with a ladder stitch. Next was the name tags. Sam designed the mock-ups on Illustrator, and then I made mindless versions of the artwork. And then we went to Staples to print them out on nice shiny cardstock. The girls that helped us loved that we are making custom Squishmallows. I think one of them even asked if I did it as a business. And unfortunately, when we took the print home, we didn't notice until after Staple closed, but they look great. Except when you hold it up to the light, it's not aligned. So we gotta go back to Staples. So I had to run back to Staples the next day. The same girl who helped us the night before was there again, and she helped me out again. She actually had to print several copies and manually adjust the printer until it was aligned perfectly. And I showed her pictures of the plushies while we were waiting for the prints. She loved them both so much, but I think her favorite was the spicy chicken. She was such a homie and didn't even charge me for the extra prints. So Staples girl, if you're watching, thanks for your help and hyping up the project. After cutting them out, it was time to attach them. We just folded them in half and used the hole puncher. Now Squishmallows have a very specific plastic piece that holds the tags, so we wanted to match that. And it kind of took us a while to find them on things that we had, so we might have stolen them off of some other stuffed animals. Once I attached the tags, these Squishmallows are done. Cue the sexy B-roll shot! After that, we wrapped them individually, so when they opened the box, it would still be a surprise. We then wrapped the box and added it to the Christmas pile. When they saw us carrying the box down, we just told them that it was their gifts that were shipped here. And just like that, the trap was set, and here's the reaction. And keep in mind, this was after they opened the felt keychains, so they really weren't expecting another handmade gift.
This for Haley and Jordan.
It's a PS5!
Imagine.
Haley, what the heck?
Oh, it's wrapped.
Oh, here you go. Double wrap.
Oh yeah, double wrap.
Wrapception.
These are really difficult to find.
Wow.
Should they be yours?
Ready?
Okay,
1,
both at the same time.
2, 3. What the heck is this? What is it? Is that a unicorn dragon? What is
You
that?
made this? Are you
Wait,
kidding me?
what? Whoa. Wait a minute.
Go ahead, read the description.
What the heck?
Dangerous
Yeah.
to go alone. Take this. Catch Jordan on his quest to be a virtual adventurer, whether it be on his computer, his phone, or one of his many consoles. Jordan is grinding to the next level in his video game. On the weekends, he enjoys brewing up a new cocktail that he can chug while conquering the BBEG. What's that?
The big bad
Oh, big bad in
evil guy.
in his Dungeons and Dragons campaign. That's amazing. You got a spicy chicken sandwich.
Haley, read
You
it.
don't have
Did
to
you guys do this? Did you guys
Haley,
hand make these?
My turn.
I'm sorry. That's insane.
Do you want to go get food? Be sure to catch Haley's latest review of one of our many local restaurants. She's on the hunt for her ultimate dining out experience. Will your favorite food spot be next? When she's not devouring a tasty meal, she's usually crafting away on the next set of gifts she's sending out to friends. And they even like freaking customize this.
I know. That's
What does
so
the QR code go to?
My YouTube channel.
Buy my merch.
Look at the tags.
Dude, that's so
Look
sick.
at the back tags.
Yeah, Salmon K.
Did you read them?
I like how you spelled it wrong.
Oops.
Squishmallows.
Yeah,
I like that.
Squishmallows.
I like that.
This is amazing.
Branded flesh toy
What the heck?
constitutes. That's amazing. Problems do not contact. It is a gift.
Wait.
Oh, that's amazing. I gotta give you guys hugs for that. That's amazing.
This one even has a little scar.
Thank you.
Yeah, they
Like
look
this
really
looks
good.
like it would be put on my the shelf at the store.
Dude, that was
Squishmallow's
the
gonna
point.
come for you now.
I know. And the lady at the Staples was really interested in the tags we were making. She was like, "Do you guys make your own Squishmallows?" I think she actually wanted one.
Oh,
And I was like,
should've
it's
said-
just a gift.
$300 commission.
Yeah, I was like,
Yeah, what the heck?
yeah, we were like secretly going into your guys' room and like looking at all the Squishmallows and like studying how they're made and like we're like, okay, what exactly is the essence
Yeah.
of a
The
Squishmallow?
As you can see, it was a huge success. They really thought we bought these for a second. And if you made it through the whole video, a round of applause for you. This might be a really long shot, but if you or anyone you know makes a custom Squishmallow from this, then please, please, please tag me on my social medias. Also, Squishmallows don't come for us. If you liked the video, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to see more content from me, and share it to your crafty friends and ask them to make one for you. I post videos twice a month, so come join the graveyard. So until next time, see ya!